Hi, my name is Megan Reeds, and this is my first ever podcast. I am so excited to share this with you. This is where I'm going to talk about all things books, 5-star books, and all the books that fall in between. I am a huge reader, and I have started BookTube earlier this year and decided to stop being afraid to start a podcast about all things books, something I've been wanting to do for a long time. This first episode is going to be the 5-star reads I've personally read this year. Now, in this episode, I will only be talking about 5-star novels I've read this year, and I will be excluding any series I have read. Because I am a huge series nut, and if I don't give myself some rules in this list, it's going to be about 30, and no one, and I do mean no one, has that much attention to listen to all of that, let alone me having to record it. So, no series, only standalones. These are books I have read in 2022. That does not, however, mean it was released this year. I will mention in this podcast when the novel was originally released as well. I am so excited to talk about these books. There will be spoilers and my personal opinions. This is a pretty dense list to start with because it's been over 6 months, so I have a list of 13 books to discuss. Whew, it's a lot of books. I hope you guys are excited, and let's get into it. These books are listed in the order they were read in this year. So let's get started. Number 1, Confessions on the 745 by Lisa Unger. I read this book in January 2022. The book came out October 2020 and is 368 pages. And let me just tell you, well, worth the read, I gotta say. Let's start with the synopsis. Selena Murphy is commuting home on the train when she strikes up a conversation with a beautiful stranger in the next seat. The woman introduces herself as Martha and soon confesses that she's been stuck in an affair with her boss. Selena, in turn, confesses that she suspects her husband is sleeping with the nanny. When the train arrives at Selena's station, the two women part ways, presumably never to meet again. Then the nanny disappears. As Selena is pulled into the mystery of what happened, and as the fractures in her marriage grow deeper, she begins to wonder, who was Martha really? But is she really prepared for what she'll discover? Okay. Loved that synopsis. I gotta tell you, that got me from the start. And I've also heard wonderful things about Lisa Unger, so I was intrigued right away. And maybe it's the New Yorker in me, something about it being set on a train really got to me. So I'm going to start with the things I absolutely loved. There are going to be spoilers in this. So I'm just preparing you now so you're not surprised, okay? Okay. I loved Selena and her sometimes cold matter-of-fact demeanor. The mystery of this book, it kept me on edge, the edge of my seat, and the twist of who Martha really was, I felt was done really well. The writing was very atmospheric and made me excited to keep reading to find out how deep Martha's twisted plan was going to go. And let me tell you, it went far more twistier and fucked up, let's be honest, than I thought it was going to go, but I really enjoyed that. The flashback scenes that gave this insight into why Martha was who she was and why. In some ways, she is a victim herself. But I also loved how, in many ways, she raised above that victim feeling at times. She was such a badass, and watching her burn down everything around her in the attempts to create a new person for herself, but also to save the woman she thought she hated, was a really great twist. One that you don't see done that often, and if you do, never this well, in my personal opinion. Selena's husband was such a piece of shit. I swear to God, I hated him more or less from the start, and watching the end and feeling the sense of victory for his demise felt extremely satisfying. The ending, I love how open-ended it is and how at the same time it leaves me with the sense that weirdly justice has been done, maybe not the ways others would choose, but it worked for me. This is the first book I've read by Lisa Unger, and I'm going to read more. I was intrigued. I thought it was so well done, and I gotta say, for me, 100% a 5-star read. Now, number 2. Drum roll, please. That's my attempt at a drum roll. The Haunting of Lee Harker by Darcy Coates. I read this in February of this year, and it was released September 2021. There's 340 pages. And let me tell you, again, never read by Darcy Coates before. And whoa, this book knocked me off my goddamn socks. I loved it from the first page. Actually, it had very The Others vibes, which really freaked me out. Oh, so good, so good. But let's start with the synopsis, okay? Sometimes the dead reach back. See, right there, I'm already gotten there. Lee Harker's, a quiet suburban home, was her sanctuary for more than a decade, until things abruptly changed. Curtains open by themselves, radios turn off and on, and a dark figure looms in the shadows of her bedroom door at night, watching her, waiting for her to finally let down her guard enough to fall asleep. Pushed to her limits, but unwilling to abandon her home, Lee struggles to find answers. But each step forces her towards something more terrifying than she ever imagined. A poisonous shadow seeps from the locked door beneath the stairs. The handle rattles through the night, and fingernails scratch at the wood. Her home harbors dangerous secrets, and now that Lee is trapped within its walls, she fears she may never escape. Do you think you're safe? You're wrong. Oh, that synopsis, my God, it got me immediately. I love horror, anything. I'm a huge horror fan. As you will soon learn from this channel, I talk a lot about horror stuff, including horror novels and movies. Oh, the movies alone, I could be here all day. So I think that's what immediately drew me in. Also, I've heard about Darcy Coates a lot, and I heard that she's a really good horror writer. I love horror writers, and I also love female horror writers, so I knew I was going to check this off. The writing of this book, honestly, it scared the shit out of me. It was very Stephen King vibes. I started reading this on a dark and stormy night, and I do not recommend doing that. Read this on a sunny day with lots of people in your house. I loved the main character, Lee, and how complicated she was, and how she sees herself in a totally different way than the world sees her. She thinks she's far more loved and cared for than, unfortunately, she actually is. She's a person that, in many ways, isolated herself. And that's even more why she feels something in her house. It would never occur to something bad could happen to her because, in her mind, bad happens to people that are more outgoing, who don't have routines, who have a multitude of friends. And it's sad in some ways how her death is brought on by her own isolation at times. Finding the twist that she's dead makes me shake. It was very The Others, like I said before. Others vibes. True, The Others vibes. If you've never seen that movie with Nicole Kidman, check it out. I recommend highly, very much like this. I did not see that coming, and I was surprised. I usually see twists like that a mile away. They did this so fucking well. I did not see it. When Sarah confronts her that moment in the hall, chilled me to the bone, and the fact Sarah was so sure of herself. And one level freaked me out even more. It left no room for wondering if I was wrong. The descriptions of the other, the person in her home, scared the shit out of me and made me turn on all the lights. The moments of her alone in her room, feeling watched in the doorway, it was an absolute killer for me. Like I said, don't read this at night, which I did. So this did not help my fear and phobias. It just intensified everything. Sarah was one of the best characters. I loved how she was described. I felt I knew her by the end of the book, and I felt truly connected and also fearful of her gifts, even though she at times reminded me of a sweet aunt who just happened to see the dead. Sarah and Lee's friendship, to me, it was so sweet and came from a place of love and loneliness for both of them. One, a young woman murdered, how horrific, and then the other, an older woman at the end of her life, and both alone for their own reasons. The ending made me feel so creepy. This book, like I said, Others vibes it, but also the boy towards the end. If you've ever seen that movie, whew, another one I highly recommend that you watch. That one messed me up. And the very end of this book, maybe it didn't do it for everybody, okay? But for me, in its own way, it made me feel warm and fuzzy, which is odd for a horror book. But this book somehow made me feel a plethora of emotions. Number 3, The Hollows by Mark Edwards. I read this book in February. It was released July 2021. It's about 335 pages. It was such a good book. Another author, actually, that I never read from until this year, Mark Edwards. I gotta tell you, I don't know what it is this year with all the new authors that I'm finding, and I'm just falling in love with them. But here we go yet again, another one that I absolutely loved. Let's start with the synopsis and let's continue with all the things that I absolutely loved about this book because another one that truly, truly deserves the 5 stars that it got. With his marriage over and his career in freefall, journalist Tom decides to reconnect with his 14-year-old daughter Frankie. Desperate to spend precious time together now that they live an ocean apart, he brings her to Hollow Falls, a cabin resort deep in the woods of Maine. From the outset, there's something a little eerie about the place. Strange whispers in the trees, wind chimes echoing through the forest. But when Tom meets true crime podcasters David and Connie, he receives a chilling warning. Hollow Falls has a gruesome history. 20 years ago this week, a double slaying shut down the resort. The crime was never solved, and now the woods are overrun with murder-obsessed tourists looking to mark the grim anniversary. It's clear that there's something deeply disturbing going on at Hollow Falls. And as Tom's dream trip turns into a nightmare, he and Frankie are faced with a choice. Uncover the truth or get out while they still can. What a friggin' awesome synopsis. I remember reading that and being like, okay, so instantly purchase. I loved everything about this book. It has a lot of Stephen King vibes. I mean, come on, it takes place in Maine, which 99, I think, % of Stephen King's books take place there. So I think, it's very easy to see that tone. Also, it's horror. It just puts me in a creepy mindset. Anything set in Maine. It's like I'm immediately there. I'm immediately thinking of the scariest shit that I can think of in lots and lots of woods. I love that this took place at a resort 20 years after a murder has occurred, and it's cult-like love and the podcast angle of everyone wanting to come 20 years later out of evil curiosity. I just loved it. I thought it was genius. I loved Tom as a character and Frankie. Their father-daughter dynamic was spot on for me, and I bought it immediately. The atmosphere with the woods and so many abandoned parts of town. The town reminded me of something out of Children of the Corn, especially those twins who I loved, Darlene and Buddy. The evilness of those twins was perfect to read, and I was scared the second they appeared because I knew blonde children in a dead town with dead eyes can't end well, and, shock of all shocks, it didn't. I loved also, honestly, the gay representation of a young boy. So many times when gay characters are written in horror, I find it to be almost as an afterthought and not very fleshed out. Or they die in the first 50 pages. Both of those are not the case with Ryan, and I loved how he was written and his comfortableness as a teenager within his own sexuality. I thought that the author did a really wonderful job of making it believable and also just really honest. And I really, really liked that representation. I loved the flashback scenes of what happened 20 years ago from the supposed killer himself. Friday the 13th vibes are strong in this book. Well written, really good, does not miss out on the blood and gore. And if you are someone that's into that, I do recommend this book. There's a lot of gory scenes. It's done really well, very 80s horror style, which I really appreciate personally. The plot I thought was well thought out, and I believed every moment of the wild, crazy ride, which, let's be honest, sometimes with horror, you kind of have to dispense your disbelief a little. You do in moments in this book, but most of it, you can be like, okay, I can actually see this happening, which is scarier, in my opinion. I love when a book ends when you think peace is going to happen. You can breathe again. And they find a way to have the dread come back in the last page or last 5 minutes of the film. And that's what you felt at the end of this book. It's what truly made this a 5-star read for me. Imagine Friday the 13th, the original, the very first one. And there that woman is sitting on the boat, hand in the water. Everything's fine. And Jason just comes up and rips her down. That's kind of the vibe that I got from the end of this book. And it did a really good job. The ending was haunting. And I am dying to read more, from Mark Edwards. Number 4, Close to Home by Lisa Jackson. I read this book in February. It was released, a whopper of a time ago. It was released in 1963 originally. It's 432 pages. Now, Lisa Jackson. I love Lisa Jackson. I have been reading her books for what feels like the better part of 10 years. And honestly, when I look back, it probably is about 10 years, maybe even longer. I have always been interested in her books. I think she does horror really well. I think she does thriller really well. And she always has characters that are flawed, but at the same time, I love them for their flaws and despite of it in times. And this book was absolutely no exception to that rule. So let me tell you what it's about. Ready? Here we go. Home. Along the shores of Oregon's wild Columbia River, the Victorian mansion where Sarah McAdams grew up is as foreboding as she remembers. The moment she and her two daughters, Jade and Gracie, pull up to the isolated drive, Sarah is beset by uneasy memories of her cold, distant mother, of the half-sister who vanished without a trace, and of a long-ago night when Sarah was found on the Widow's Walk, feverish and delirious. But Sarah has vowed to make a fresh start and renovate the old place. Between tending to her girls and the rundown property, she has little time to dwell on the past until until a new, more urgent menace enters the picture. One by one, teenage girls are disappearing. Frantic for her daughter's safety, Sarah feels the house's walls closing in on her once again. Somewhere deep in her memory is the key to a very real and terrifying danger. And only by confronting her most terrifying fears can she stop the nightmare roaring back to life once more. Oh, I am a huge fan of Lisa Jackson. I mean, like I just said, what is this? Maybe the 10th or 12th book I've read by her. This is definitely the oldest publicated one that I've ever read. She is so good at mysteries that are dark and the familial problems and time jumps. I love that she does that. I think in most of her books that I've ever read, she does the time jumps, and I think she does them really well. Also, she has very dark themes in her books: love, hate, rape, alcoholism, abuse in other forms. So I do say, if you want to read this or anything else from this author, please be aware of those trigger warnings I just listed, because those themes do tend to be in many of her works. I thought the writing, as always, with Lisa Jackson was done really well and very atmospheric. I got a lot of small town vibes, and I loved how everyone knew everyone. It really added to the environment and the feeling of home. I felt it was very fleshed out. It felt real. It felt like I was in that town, as much as I didn't want to be, because nobody seemed to want to be. I felt that contention with where I was, and that was totally meant to happen, and I love that in the book. I love that this book does flashbacks to other time periods. I am a huge sucker for flashbacks. It's so sad in movies and books. I love that to help you connect to a time and place that really work for me. And it always seems to help me connect more to the characters, even if it's a lost relative or generational. I always just find a way to connect better that way. I loved how flawed the main characters were, especially Sarah, and her dysfunctional relationship with her mother and her feelings of coming back home to where she started. Almost as if she was giving up on what she expected and wanted for herself. I thought the relationship rang really true, and I could feel her pain in those moments with her mother. Also, her relationship with Clint and the secrets she kept. I wanted to smack her in a way for keeping them so long, but at the same time, if I was a scared teenager at the time, I probably would have kept being pregnant a secret as well, or at least been nervous to talk about it, at the very, very least. The mystery here is really dark, with multiple women going missing from this small town over the years, and the lack of looking for them, just assuming they were troubled. It hit me how sad that was, but also how old town misogynistic it was to just assume a young girl would go missing to never return, and that's not an odd occurrence. The aspects of ghosts in this book really intrigued me, and I thought they did it really well, towing the line of a ghost story just barely. I loved Gracie, the 12-year-old, and how precocious she was, and her love of the supernatural, as I have as well. There were a lot of people who I felt cold. Oh, cold. That I felt sorry, my brain could have been the culprit. And yet when I found out who it was, I was still shocked, and I appreciate that. The fact that this book ends up being a very big trafficking of women really upped the stakes for me at the end. I felt heartbroken for the girls that had come before them, and I felt their lives were truly in danger. Sarah and the revelations about her birth were shocking and also disgusting. So I again state that this book has a lot of triggers, and one of them is involved in Sarah's birth. Incest is heavily talked about towards the end, and if that is a trigger for you, I would stay away from this book. But I felt that storyline, as disturbing as it was, added a layer of why Sarah's family is the way it is and why her mother was always so strained from her. I also really liked Rosalie as a character and her no nonsense approach to things. She was a badass for me to read and rooted for. And when she escaped and hurt that piece of shit, I was screaming how happy I was. This book makes you feel things, some things you expect, and some uncomfortable things as well. Like any good book, it pushes you to look at things that most would look away from. Number 5, Pretty as a Picture by Elizabeth Little. I read this in March and it was released February of 2020. It's 339 pages. Let's get to the synopsis. Marissa Dahl, I hope I'm saying the last name right, Dahl, a shy but successful film editor, travels to a small island off the coast of Delaware to work with the legendary and legendarily demanding director Tony Reese on a feature film with the familiar logline, Some Girls Die. It's not much to go on, but the specifics don't concern Marissa. Whatever the script is, her job is the same. She'll spend her days in the editing room doing what she does best, turning pictures into stories. But she soon discovers that on this set, nothing is as it's supposed to be, or as it seems. There are rumors of accidents and indiscretions, of burgeoning scandals and perilous schemes. Half the crew has been fired, the other half wants to quit. Even the actors have figured out something is wrong, and no one seems to know what happened to the editor she was hired to replace. Then she meets the intrepid and incorrigible teenage girls who are determined to solve the real-life murder that is the movie's central subject. And before long, Marissa is drawn into the investigation herself. The only problem is, the killer may still be on the loose, and he might not be finished. I cannot stress enough how much I love the main character and her quirkiness and her ability, or lack thereof, of doing anything else but movie editing. It's the one and true thing she thinks she's truly good at. She finds herself a very boring person, and in my opinion, she is anything but. I found this a fast-moving book with a lot of high stakes attached. I am a huge fan of an author named Parnell Hall and his mysteries, and this gave me a little of that vibe. A mystery that's solid and fun, but also isn't taking itself so seriously, and I love that. I loved all the movie conversations and the witty dialogue. I found myself laughing more than I probably should have, considering there is an abundance of murder and suspects, but I didn't care, as I was having fun discovering everything. This was a book I truly didn't want to finish because I enjoyed being in Marissa's head so much. I love the flash forward moments of a future podcast taking place. I thought it was fun and so established who's alive and also some of the motives that I was wondering about. And bam, then they were answered in a full calculated way. I loved that. Absolutely loved it. I thought the epilogue was amazing and grabbed me from the first line. I knew I was hooked the first line in this book. There was tons of Mr. X. I loved Marissa's self-deprecating humor. Maybe I can relate because I am like that at times myself. I love that at one point we're not just investigating the murder that had recently happened, but the original murder that happened years ago that this film is based on. I thought that was an engaging twist. I love the romance we got with Isaiah and Marissa. And God, did I hate Marissa's best friend's boyfriend. He was a huge dick and obviously deluded in his own talents. I loved Marissa's conversations with Billy. They are both people that are neurotypical, and to see them leaning on one another and the moments of understanding between them and Marissa realizing that they both see the world differently and looking at herself in a different way. I thought that was done really well and really respectfully to people that are neuroatypical. I hope I'm saying that right. It was fascinating to see the inner workings of making a film. The twist was awesome, and I did not see it coming. I also thought the ending was genius. Cannot recommend this enough. a must check out. Number 6, A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. I read this book in March. It was released January 2022. Actually, when I read this book, I posted about it, and the author herself actually wrote me a really nice comment. So thank you, Stacey. Let's get to the synopsis. When Chloe Davis was 12, 6 teenage girls went missing in her small Louisiana town. By the end of the summer, her own father had confessed to the crimes and was put away for life, leaving Chloe and the rest of her family to grapple with the truth and try to move forward while dealing with the aftermath. Now, 20 years later, Chloe is a psychologist in Baton Rouge and getting ready for her wedding. While she finally has a fragile grasp on the happiness she's worked so hard to achieve, she sometimes feels as it's out of control of her own life, as the troubled teens who are their patients. So when a local teenage girl goes missing, and then another, that terrifying summer comes crashing back. Is she paranoid, seeing parallels from her past that aren't actually there? Or for the second time in her life, is Chloe about to unmask a killer? This is the debut from this author, and I gotta tell you, I was shocked by that, considering how well written it was and the levels of darkness that it went to. It screams of someone who has been in this for years, and she is very talented, and I cannot wait to read more from her in the upcoming years. I could feel the pain that Chloe was going through in the way it was written. There was a level of rawness to it, and her fear of what do you do when you love the monster. That whole dialogue of what do you do when the monster was who you ran to and helped you and who you loved. If you can love someone like that, capable of those things, what does that make you? It was really deep, and I found myself wondering similar things. It was beautiful in its level of conflicting thoughts it brought even within me. I loved Chloe and her character and her desperate need at moments to understand what for most is a thing no one can truly understand, taking a life, and wondering why her father was that way and what signs her and her brother missed. This was a book I truly didn't want to finish because I just enjoyed it. I loved it so much. The mystery was such a solid one. It was such a great premise of characters that I trusted one minute and was terrified of the next. At one point when the murders restarted, I thought everyone was a suspect, even Chloe, and that's good writing to not even trust the narrator. The twists in this book were shocking and well done. I found myself staring open-mouthed at the book, going no one way, then another to the... It was insane. Every part of it was insane. I'm getting flabbergasted even talking about it because the ending I didn't see coming. It was totally out of left field, but I loved that it was. I loved the backstory with Daniel. I found that really interesting and salivating to find out more about his past right up until the end. The characters are all really fleshed out in this book, and I was engrossed from the start. I would highly recommend this author. She is a true talent, and I can't wait to see what she creates next. Number 7, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I read this book in March of this year, and it was released March of 2020. It had 394 pages. Now, before I even go into the synopsis of this book, I want to stress how absolutely amazing this book was. I cried during this book. This book made me feel so many different emotions. I didn't want to finish it, but at the same time, I didn't want to put it down. It was such a conflicting moment for me as a reader. And I don't get moments like that often. And I feel the more and more you read, that feeling, that stomach grumbling of, I love this book, but I don't want it to end, that happiness and sadness all at the same time. You know, after a while, you kind of don't get that feeling anymore. And this book brought that back, that love, that genuine love I had for books and these characters. They moved me. I've never read T.J. Klune before, but you best believe after this book, I went out and I got Under the Whispering Door, which is also going to be on this list, actually. Absolutely amazing. Okay, ready for the synopsis. Linus Baker is a by-the-book caseworker in the department in charge of magical youth. He's tasked with determining whether 6 dangerous magical children are likely to bring about the end of the world. Arthur, oh, this is going to be a hard one. Arthur Panarasis, sorry if I just butchered that, is the master of the orphanage. He would do anything to keep the children safe, even if it means the world will burn and his secrets will come to light. The House in the Cerulean Sea is an enchanting love story, masterfully told about the profound experience of discovering an unlikely family in an unexpected place and realizing that family is yours. One of the best books I have read in the last 10 years, easily. This was, like I said, the first TJ Klune book I ever read, and I rectified that super quick. I find him such a talent, and I am now an absolute huge fan of his work. I loved the gay representation in this book, and I fell in love with Linus. And by the in the book, and how he never wanted to make any mistakes, and in doing so he found himself in his 40s and never really living. Even from the beginning, I knew I was going to love him, and when I think about it and all the times he made me laugh, I cannot gush enough about this book and these characters. And I'm sorry if I'm flubbing over my words. It's just I have so many words for this. I hope I'm doing it justice. Let's just put it like that. I love how this book tackles and looks at being different, and how who you were born as, the Antichrist or a fairy, it shouldn't be judged, and the way the government tries to, in some ways, keeps his hands on these children's, the prejudice and all of it moving forward and seeing it and reading it, it really affected me. This book makes you look at things differently and question what maybe you would do and wouldn't do, and how you would look at things. The setting was so atmospheric. I felt I was there, and I was another character in the house with all of them. And God, how I wish that was true. I loved all the characters in this novel, but I have a very special place in my heart for Linus, but also Lucy and what he's going through, the small child who never asked to be so feared and so ununderstood by others. I thought it is genius that they made him a small child. It really ignited how sorry I felt for him with how the outside world feared him because of who he was, something he could never change. I also loved Talia the gnome and the way she spoke and threatened Linus, but also loved all those around her. Sal was a favorite of mine too. I'm saying all this and I'm just realizing I loved everybody. There was no favorite character, which is amazing in a book that you can love them all in so many different ways and you really can't pick. Like, for example, I love Arthur and the way he looks at these children and how he loves them, and the way he looks at the world, and how by him just being honest about himself, it makes Linus question things for the very first time himself. He's not used to people being so honest, and Arthur has nothing to hide, so to speak. The writing is so moving and beautifully written, but also shocking in its levels of honesty and hitting the nail on the head in such a simplistic way. A way I feel we should all be spoken to about such things. I cried like 6 times, and I never do that in books. Like, it's so rare. I think in my lifetime it's probably happened. I don't want to be dramatic, but 8? Honestly, probably 8 times in my entire life have I cried at a book. This one got me 6 times in a row. I didn't want to finish this book. I found myself stalling because I didn't want it to end, like I said, and it's such a beautiful feeling to have. It's why readers read, to find a connection and a love for a character that we don't want to give them up. The comedy in this book had me laughing so hard on more than one occasion. Milk came out of my nose, and my husband thought it was the funniest thing. I was too busy choking and grossed out by myself to think it was funny, but later on, still didn't think it was funny, but fine, I get it. I honestly can't wait to reread it. It was one of the best things I have read in so many years. It was a fantastic ride. Everything about it was just so absolutely amazing. Number 8, The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. I read this book in April of this year, and it was released March 2022. It was 352 pages. I have read Simone St. James before, actually, twice, and I got to tell you, I always found her books really intriguing, really interesting, engaging. None of them are really short books, but let me tell you, I get through these books in like a day, and I have a small child at home, and the fact that I can sit down and be like, I cannot put it down, I will not put it down, is insane. That I was able to do this with having a child, with having a husband, with being crazy. I found myself at nighttime, instead of sleeping, which every mother should sleep, I found myself going for this book. So it was absolutely amazing. Here is the synopsis. A true crime blogger gets more than she bargained for while interviewing the woman acquitted of two cold case slayings in the chilling new novel from the New York Times bestselling author of The Sundown Motel. In 1977, Claire Lake, Oregon, was shaken by the Lady Killer murders. Two men, seemingly randomly, were murdered with the same gun, with strange notes left behind. Beth Greer was the perfect suspect, a rich, eccentric, 23-year-old woman, seen fleeing one of the crimes. But she was acquitted, and she retreated to the isolation of her mansion. Oregon, 2017. Shay Collins is a receptionist, but by night, she runs a true crime website, The Book of Cold Cases, a passion-fueled project by the attempted abduction she escaped as a child. When she meets Beth by chance, Shay asks her for an interview. To Shay's surprise, Beth says yes. They meet regularly at Beth's mansion, though Shay is never comfortable there. Items move when she's not looking, and she could swear she's seen a girl outside the window. The allure of learning the truth about the case from the start, from the smart, charming Beth, is too much to resist. But even as they grow closer, Shay senses something isn't right. Is she making friends with a manipulative murderer? Or are there other dangers lurking in the darkness of the Greer house? Like I said, I am a huge fan of Simone St. James. This is my third book that I've actually read by her, and I must say, I think her work, it just keeps getting better as she goes. I know that this book has elements of true horror and ghosts, and I just thought it was so well done that there was also flesh and blood, real ghosts from another time. I found it so fascinating. I love that this book takes place in the 1970s in flashback scenes to show Beth Greer accused of multiple homicides. You get to see the time frame, how others portrayed her in the media, and to see the house that later haunts her, and in many ways keeps her prisoner, and how the haunting actually began. Can a place be haunted, or is it not a place but rather a person? It's an interesting question that is asked in this book. I love Shay and how her mind works. I love that she's a true crime fan, and due to what happened to her as a child, I feel that she has an interesting look at everything that others don't. And they really explored that well as her guilt and PTSD from surviving her incident as a child. The writing style is haunting in its complexity. One moment you hate Beth, the next you understand her, and even at moments feel sorry for her. The author never loses scope in this book for all her character and making them all three-dimensional, but she does an excellent job with Beth and Shay, personally, in my opinions. The mystery over did Beth really kill all those years ago was interesting and had me wondering right up until the end. I did not see the end coming, and for someone with a lot of time sees these big gotcha moments, it was great to not see it coming. It was great to have a moment of, oh my God, being shocked like everybody else usually is. A psychologically dark thriller that I couldn't wait to devour, and that's just what I did. I couldn't stop. I absolutely loved it. I would recommend this book to anyone that really wants a new thriller and something exciting to sink their teeth into. Absolutely amazing. Number 9, Say Her Name by Dreda Mitchell and Ryan Carter. I have never read from this author before, and this book, it took me by storm. It was so amazing and so well written, and at times I felt absolutely disgusted, and I know that was the point in many ways. This book I would highly recommend. I've actually recommended it to many, many of my friends and family members. This book was amazing. And actually, I got this book for free through Kindle. And gotta tell you, I mean, I usually get some great books through Kindle for free, but this really amazed me. So I suggest to go check it out as soon as you can. I read this book in May, and it was released April of 2022 with 308 pages. Here is the synopsis. In this chilling thriller from the best-selling author of Spare Room, one woman just wants the truth about who she really is, but she's not the only one looking. It's 20 years since Ava, a biracial woman, was adopted as an 8-year-old, and Cherry and Carlton Sugar McNeil have always been the only parents she's wanted or needed. But when she's dealt the double blow of Cherry's death and her own suspension from work, Eva decides it's time to discover who she was before she was theirs. Against Sugar's advice, Ava joins a DNA database, desperate for a match that will unlock her identity, and when a positive hit comes, she's excited to learn there are other relations out there who might hold the key. But the closer Ava gets to uncovering her past, the more it appears someone is trying to stop her from finding the truth. As she continues to dig, Ava is drawn into a dark and merciless underside to society, where Black women disappear without a word, names erased from history, no search parties, no desperate pleas for their return. Once someone tried to save Ava from all this. Someone wanted a better life for her. But now that she's torn down the facade of her life, has she come too far to be spared again? I've never read from this author before. This was the very first time, and I am so excited to continue to read from her in the future. And actually, she also reached out to me after I wrote a review about her book, and she was very sweet and very welcoming and very nice. So if she's listening, hi. I thought this story was so sad in so many ways. The fact that these beautiful Black women weren't looked for, all because they didn't fit into a mold that society deemed worthy, which to me, it's one of the sickest things that I've ever seen. They were all beautiful and smart and talented, and somehow because they weren't white, they weren't important enough to be missed. Or at least that's what the killer hoped, and what subsequently happened for over 20 years. Reading this book as a white woman was very challenging at times, to see how far we still have not come in the eyes of race, and how, as much as this book is a work of fiction, unfortunately, we have to be honest, there are aspects that are most definitely not fictional in this community, and it makes me sick. But that was the point. It's, in a response in which this shouldn't happen to anyone. Not to mention, this was also well written and an engaging mystery. There were many layers to say her name, and this was one of them. I cannot ignore and will not be blind to it. And it's the first thing that I wanted to mention. Ava was a wonderful character who had gone through some traumatic things from her childhood before she was adopted, and I felt her pain in wanting answers. In that pain, I felt I understood her. There is a scene, a very, in my opinion, brutal scene, when Ava, as a small child, was at the orphanage. They came and shaved her head, and I remember reading that and crying for her. I felt so angry and scared for her, and ashamed that someone could do that. And right when I thought I couldn't feel more for these characters, I did. The mystery is so solid, and I love anything that has to do with finding where your roots are from and genealogy, which this book lightly touches on. This is such a well-written book, and the descriptions really sold it for me. I found myself reading it in one day, and I did not want to put it down. I loved the ending of this book so much. I want to reread it to just get back to that ending. I highly recommend this book to everyone. I was surprised by it because I had never heard of this author before, but now I am a fan, and hopefully after this, you will be too. Number 10. Just Like Home. I read this book in May of this year, and it was released July 19th, 2022. I actually got this book through NetGalley, so thank you, NetGalley, for that. Wonderful book. I really had a good time. I love my horror. I love my mystery. I love my extreme thrillers. And this book was extreme, and it was just so good. I don't want to give too much away, but it was just such a good book. Let's get to the synopsis, because it gives away, but it doesn't. It's so good. Okay. Come home, Vera's mother called, and Vera obeyed. In spite of their long estrangement, in spite of the memories, she's come back to the home of a serial killer. Back to face the love she had for her father and the bodies he buried there, beneath the house he built for his family. Coming home is hard enough for Vera, and to make things worse, she and her mother aren't alone. A parasitic artist has moved into the guest house out back and is slowly stripping Vera's childhood for spare parts. He insists that he isn't the one leaving notes around the house in her father's handwriting. But who else could it possibly be? There are secrets yet undiscovered in the foundations of the notorious Crowder house. Vera must face them and find out for herself just how deep the rot goes. This is the first novel I've ever read by Sarah Gailey. I received a copy of this book before it was released, and it was just so good. I could not believe how good. Actually, you know what? I just realized, because I'm so dopey, I'm so sorry. I don't think that I said that this book, just like Home, is by Sarah Gailey. I cannot believe I forgot to say that. I found Vera very odd and terrifying at times as a character. I felt I could never really fully believe what she was saying, and I liked that in this book because I felt like she was going back to her home, and in so many ways she was blind to the truth. And as we all are, you know, where we come from and what we've seen. She's blind to the things that her father has done, and she looks at him and there's an atmosphere of innocence. And I just thought it was really good that we couldn't truly trust the narrator. I love when that happens in books. It makes me second guess everything, and that's amazing to me. The atmosphere in this book was something out of Hill House or Amityville. You could feel the evil the second we were in the town, let alone at the doorstep of the house that became so infamous. The dilapidated floorboards and the mold in corners of the room made me not only see the neglect, but I felt it. And I felt the house was always watching. I felt uneasy, and in that uneasiness, I felt I was reading something really special. Vera and her mother's relationship was one of the most dysfunctional I have ever read, but the moments of clarity, the moments where you could almost tell they loved one another, was just as bad in some ways. So many things left unsaid, so many lies and things hidden over these years that it broke me to hear some of the things being said. I love that the house is its own character. And I got to tell you, it was its own character in so many ways. I think, actually, in so many ways, it was the main character, far more than Vera even. The flashbacks of the murders were excellently played out and shocking in how it was presented from young Vera's point of view. The ending was gruesome and at the same time cathartic for the main character. I felt I should have maybe been disgusted by some of it, but I truly felt that there was a need for it for Vera. Absolutely great horror book. I would highly recommend, and I can't wait to read more of Sarah Gailey's works. Number 11, The Cabin in the Woods by Sarah Alderson. I read this book in May of this year, and it was released in July of this year. I was, again, very lucky. NetGalley actually gave me this book. Thank you again, NetGalley. This book was 400 pages. It was amazing. And you know, it's so crazy. I'm going to read you the synopsis, and it's not going to do it justice. Basically, think of the movie Double Jeopardy, okay? It's so, that to me says it's better than what the synopsis is saying. But here we go. I digress. In a cabin in a wood, a woman by the window stood. Glancing out, she thought she heard footsteps, whistling. Something stirred. Hiding there, she fears the night, for what's done in the dark will come to light. She must run fast to escape her lie, or she'll be the next to die. See, good synopsis, not bad. But I gotta tell you, I think saying like Jeopardy is way better. Double Jeopardy is one of my favorite movies with Ashley Judd from the 90s, and that's what it's more similar to, in my opinion, than what the synopsis is saying. I just thought it was going to be a run-of-the-mill horror book, and let me tell you, it was anything but a run-of-the-mill anything. Let me tell you, especially horror. I've never read from this author before, but I gotta tell you, I thought I was going to give it a 3-star. I thought it was going to turn out to be something all right. I wasn't going to be really into it, but I gotta tell you, I was shocked by how much I loved it. I actually can't wait to reread it. I wish it was a movie, because I would have some popcorn and I would be watching it. Actually, after this, I rented Double Jeopardy because that's how it made me think. The character Rose was amazing. I felt her grit the moment she appeared in this book. I was not disappointed in her character, her motivations, and her sweet revenge for all that had been taken from her. I loved the moments we also got with her sister Daisy, and to see the contrast between two people who grew up in the same bad environment and how one went one way and the other chose the path of addiction. This author was just wonderful. The ending is one of my favorite endings of the year so far. The revelation I don't want to give too much away, because if I give one thing away, nobody's going to want to read the book at the end. But just remember, Double Jeopardy vibes, very well written. The ending, the sweet, sweet revenge. Amazing, amazing sweet revenge. I would highly recommend this book. There were so many twists and turns along the way. Many moments, things fell apart, and you were constantly guessing what's going to happen next. And is anything going to work out, or is it all going to be absolute shit? I had an amazing time reading this, and I will be checking out more by this author soon. 100% for sure. Number 12, Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. I read this book June this year, and it was released in 2021, and it was 373 pages. Like I said before, T.J. Klune, he stole my heart. It just stole my heart. This is the second book that I've read from him ever, and this is also the second book I've read from him this year, and both of them are in my 5-star reads. So that should just tell you right there, he is amazing. The last book, I thought, okay, I love it so much. God, cross your fingers, hope I like the next one by him. And I didn't just like it, absolutely loved it. Again, I cried. What is with TJ Klune and making me cry? I mean, seriously, the way he writes, it's insane. It's so freaking good. Let me read you the synopsis so you can feel the same as me. It's a short synopsis, but it does it, man. Let me tell you. Welcome to Charon's Crossing. The tea is hot, the scones are fresh, and the dead are just passing through. When a reaper comes to collect Wallace from his own funeral, Wallace begins to suspect he might be dead. And when Hugo, the owner of a peculiar tea shop, promises to help him cross over, Wallace decides he's definitely dead. But even in death, he's not ready to abandon the life he barely lived. So when Wallace is given 1 week to cross over, he sets about living a lifetime in 7 days. And let me tell you, this book was so good. Honestly, again, one of the best books I've read in the last 10 years. It's just absolutely amazing. Wallace Price is written at the start as such, honestly, let's be honest, a huge fucking jackass. I was a little afraid I would hate him, but even in his bad moments, I could see why he did what he did, why he didn't feel the way others might. And in those moments of harshness, I also saw a glimmer of brokenness, and that made me have hope. And I'm happy I did, because I ended up loving this little asshole by the end of this book. And I feel I can call him that, considering he admits to that himself in this book, that he's an absolute ass. And so does everybody else around him, actually. The cafe is amazing. I want to go there and drink tea by the gallon, and I don't even like tea. So that should tell you how much the atmosphere spoke to me. And the way the cafe is described, and how it's all weird angles, and nothing fits quite right. It's amazing. And the cover, oh my god, it's so beautiful. This and The House in the Cerulean Sea both have covers that I literally drool over. I loved the characters May, the Grim Reaper. She is one of the best characters I've read in a long time, and I love her banter with Wallace, and her backstory really tugged at the heartstrings. If I could compare this book to a film, I have to say, actually nothing. I changed my mind. I was going to say it reminds me of this one book, a movie, but it doesn't. Nothing really reminds me of this. It's just, it's so absolutely amazing. I loved it. I loved it so much. It was such a good time. All the characters were amazing. It made me cry. It made me cry so much, and I want everybody to read this book. I just thought it was so well written and so entertaining. I could not recommend this enough. You have to read this book. If there's one thing you have to do this year, it's read this. Number 13, The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I read this in June, and it was released September of 2021. It was 304 pages. I really did. I loved this book. I wasn't expecting to. This is a book that I've actually owned on Kindle for, God, I guess over a year now. And I kept saying, I'm going to read it. I kept seeing booktubers reading it all of last year. And then it just kind of got put in the wayside a little bit, because so many other books were coming out. And then I finally said, let me just try this. If I don't like it, I don't like it. It's fun. I bought it a long time ago. I fell in love with this book. I thought it was really amazing. So let's get to the synopsis, which I think is amazing, by the way. Somewhere out beyond the edge of the universe, there is a library. that contains an infinite number of books, each one the story of another reality. One tells the story of your life as it is, along with another book for the other life you could have lived if you had made a different choice at any point in your life. While we all wonder how our lives might have been, what if you had the chance to go to the library and see it for yourself? Would any of these other lives truly be better? In The Midnight Library, Matt Haig's enchanting blockbuster novel, Nora Seed finds herself faced with this decision. Faced with the possibility of changing her life for a new one, following a different career, undoing old breakups, realizing her dreams of becoming a glaciologist. She must search within herself as she travels through the Midnight Library to decide what is truly fulfilling her life and what makes it worth living in the first place. I mean, I remember reading that synopsis and immediately thinking, oh my God, there's books, there's a library, this is so interesting. And it's 100 times more interesting once you actually get into it and find out what it's truly about. This is the first book I've ever read by Matt Haig. And after I finished this, I immediately bought another book from him, which I still have not read. I'm going to read it. I'm probably going to read it soon. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up on the end of my 5-year list. 5-year list. My brain is slowly turning to mush on this recording. I'm sorry. If it ended up in my end of the year 5 stars. That's what I meant to say. Sorry about that. This book is fantastic, and the way they deal with death and different lives and choices, it's all dealt with so well. The plot is so interesting, and it's so refreshing to see such a fresh idea that gets me engaged. This is an amazing book. I cannot recommend it enough. If you could do it all again, have another go around, would you? Would it be better? That's one of the questions asked in this book, and it's a question fully looked at and examined. And we all think what's on the other side will be better, but how wrong that assumption can be. And it shows how no one can have everything, and how much of what matters to you now are you willing to give up to have a pipe dream of what you thought would be better in some instance by changing something. Someone you love can die, or you never meet them, a parent you loved and were close to, by changing one thing, they died sooner and alone. What would you do? What is life really worth if it's not the memories, if it's not the connections, if it's not all of those things that creates who you are in this special place just for you? Nora is such a complicated character, and who I adore. Life hasn't worked out for her, and you feel bad. And also, you get the sense early on the reason her life has stalled isn't because she doesn't have choices, but because she has too many, and she's too afraid to make a mistake. So, in that fear, she ends up making none and not really living, just wishing. And I find that so relatable to so many people, especially in your 30s, to look back and go, God, I could have done this or that, instead of seeing the door in front of you and the fact that it's still wide open. They deal with suicide in this book, but they deal with it in a very gentle way. And I have to say, I do really appreciate that. I love as a reader that the afterlife is one big library of every choice you didn't make and could make, and in the in-between and death, you just relive them and pick a new path. I have no idea if that's at all how the end will be, but that's one way that makes me smile. The characters were all really well thought out and fleshed out. I love seeing all the many different timelines and versions of Nora, but not only her, but of her brother and her boyfriend, her friends, and all the people she would meet along the way. I also love in this book, they have a book of regrets that Nora has. And as she lives all these lives, she finds her book of regrets shrinking because so many of them were things that she never needed to regret in the first place because she was never responsible for it. And I feel like that's so relatable. Like if we all had a book of regrets, how long would it be? And how many things in it would be things that honestly, it's just our own insecurities, and it's nothing that we could have done differently or fixed. And I found that such an honest part of the writing, and I really like that. Honestly, this was one of the best books I've read in a long time. It's now becoming one of my new instant all-time favorites, and I'm so happy I gave this book a read, and hopefully I will continue to be a fan of this wonderful author's other works down the road. So, that's it, guys. My 13 best books of 2022 so far. I really hope you enjoyed the list and maybe you found a new book to check out or a new author. Feel free to tell me your favorite books in the comments. And if you think my list could use some improving, I'm dying to hear from you guys and start a conversation. The next podcast I'm going to be doing is the worst books I've read in 2022 so far. And that one might be, it will be, let's be honest, a little more brutal. I'm a little nervous about how many books will be on that list, but that's for another time and another day. I had such a great time with you guys. This is Megan Reads, hoping to find you next time happy, healthy, and above all else, reading.